Y'all, I want to tell you a story about my brother. He was a combat medic in the Army's Big Red One. This is the famed division of World War II, well, even World War I, Korea, Vietnam. With the Big Red One, he was a combat medic. He lost his leg and hand in Afghanistan while taking care of fellow soldiers that were wounded in the Big Red One when an IED attack hit them twice. He was the second person to get hit. Now, when my brother came home from that war, my brother was also a fellow Kentuckian, both of us are, he came home in pieces with a long road of recovery and a whole new life that he had to build from scratch. And he had a whole new life that he had to figure out. There was a law, though, that stood between him and a closed door when he re-entered civilian life. Now, re-entering civilian life without this law would have been more than an uphill battle. He already had uphill battle that he was battling while learning how to walk again, how to operate with one hand less than he had before. But if it hadn't have been for this law standing between him and a closed door, he would have had a much worse time than he already did. So this law says this man who gave a leg and a hand for his own country cannot be turned away from a job or a building or a future because of the wounds he earned serving you. That law is the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. It is one of the proudest, most bipartisan things this country ever did. Signed 36 years ago in my lifetime, and it has quietly protected millions of Americans, including a whole lot of our veterans here in this county ever since. And right now in Washington, they're taking it apart. Not with a vote. You got to watch quietly with a memo and lawyers and layoffs. So today, this one's personal. Let's go on ahead and let's talk about it. So, welcome to the Hillbilly Think Tank. With me, Spencer Keck. I am the educated hillbilly. And no, that's not an oxymoron. Don't call me a moron. There have been educated, erudite, and emancipated hillbillies in Kentucky ever since my kith and kin came through the Cumberland Gap with Daniel Boone and the Long Hunters on their quest to find life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness here. Now, again, I'm Spencer Keck. I'm a retired Navy doc, combat veteran, currently a public school teacher, and currently candidate for magistrate on the Hardin County Fiscal Court, District 3. And today I'm wearing two hats. A veteran with a brother who lived and died by the Americans Disabilities Act. And I'm also a public school teacher who sees the other end of it in my own classroom. So y'all, buckle up, because this is going to be not just my story, but it's your story too. And it's one that we cannot allow to have shut down because someone decides They don't think that our veterans, our kids, our community is worth the law that's there to protect them. All right, y'all. So, what they're actually doing. This means everything. As I said, my brother gave his leg and his hand for this country and for this right to have the ADA help him out. So let me be careful and precise because the truth here is strong enough that I don't need to exaggerate it. Just days ago, right before the 27th anniversary of a landmark Supreme Court disability ruling, the Justice Department issued a legal memo. And in it, the official position of the United States government became this: that neither the Americans with the Disabilities Act nor Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act requires that disabled people be served in the most integrated setting. Now, in plain English, that integration mandate is the principle upheld by the Supreme Court in 1999 that says a disabled person has the right to live in their own community, in their home, with their family, with support, instead of being warehoused in an institution. For nearly 50 years, that's been the law's promise. And this administration just told every state in the union, as far as we're concerned, you don't have to honor it. That's not the only thread. Texas and 8 other states are in court right now arguing that Section 504, a bedrock disability rights law, is unconstitutional. The White House quietly stripped accessibility guidance off of its own website and pulled 11 pieces of ADA guidance for businesses. The Justice Department pulled back the deadlines for making websites and apps accessible to blind Americans by years. Another agency tried to roll back the accessibility standards for federally funded buildings, calling them, and I want you to hear this word, unduly burdensome. Unduly burdensome. Now, here's the honest guardrail, and I'll always give you the truth straight. They cannot actually repeal the Americans with Disability Act with a memo. Only Congress can do that, and they don't have the votes. So the law is still in the books. But understand this strategy. They're not burning the house down where you can see the flames. They're going into the basement and quietly cutting out the load bearing walls, the enforcement, the guidance, the interpretation, and betting the house stays standing just long enough that nobody notices until somebody leans on a wall that isn't there anymore. And the person who leans on that wall is a disabled American who suddenly finds the protection they counted on just isn't being enforced. Now, let's bring it home to our veterans, because we're full of veterans in this county, me being one. So bringing it to Hardin County, because this is not abstract for us, not even a little. We are a military county. Fort Knox is right here. And that means we have one of the highest concentrations anywhere of men and women who served, came home, took off the uniform, and they now carry a service-connected disability. Some visible, some you'd never see. The Americans with Disability Act is the law that helps that veteran get hired in a civilian job with a reasonable accommodation instead of a rejection. It's the law that makes the building accessible, the website usable, the workplace fair. And that integration mandate they just went after, that's the principle that lets a severely wounded veteran live at home, in his community, cared for by the people who love him, instead of being shipped off to an institution because the community-based services got cut and nobody made the state provide them. Tom, hopefully I'm back. Hopefully I didn't lose audio too long. Think about the families too, the husbands and wives and parents who become full-time caregivers for a veteran. and who rely on community-based supports and stipends to make it work. Now, I know plenty in this county who rely on this and who have it constantly. And these are small stipends. When we're talking about family members and caregivers, being those caregivers, the family members, who they have to either quit their jobs to take care of their family member or severely cut back their work hours to part-time, that stipend is their bloodline when it comes to having enough money to buy food and to stay afloat. When you weaken the integration mandate, when you cut the enforcement, you are pulling the floor out from under those caregivers. Now, again, I'll take it back to my brother. When he lost his leg and hand in Afghanistan, that took the rug out from underneath all of us. For him, of course, it pulled the floor out from underneath him. I see Timothy Cole saying I lost audio. Tim, hopefully it's back. If you could let me know, please. So, when my brother lost his leg and hand and was looking for employment, when he finally learned how to walk again on that artificial leg, he even had a hand molded to make it look like he had a hand when he didn't have a full hand. When he learned how to go out into public with that artificial leg and the artificial hand, he was ready to get back into the game, back into the fight, to serve the nation again. And thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and thanks, Tim, for letting me know, that ADA guaranteed that he could have a place at a table for an interview for a job, that no one could turn him away. And he got hired on by the Department of Defense as one of their civilian workers. So, as a civilian, he went back to work for the Department of Defense at Aberdeen Proving Grounds and was able to be gainfully employed again, thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act. I have kids that I teach that rely on that 504 rehabilitation portion that we're talking about for their needs to be met in school, for their disability, not to drag them down, but to actually for us to be able to lift them up in spite of it. I'm sure there's people in this county that have kids with not just 501 plans, but also, that require the ECE portion of education to be there, to be well funded. But if that IEP is going to be ignored now due to these memos, guys, that's going to hurt a lot of my students. And I cannot watch that in good conscience without saying we have to do something about it. All right, so I took an oath to defend this country, same as my brother did. We didn't do it so the country could turn around and decide that the people who gave the most are now too burdensome to protect. But that's what these Department of Justice memos say. And who is it that's writing these memos? Oh, I'm not sure if you're going to be too surprised to find out. But here, let's go. Let's roll this beautiful bean footage here.
Last week, the Department of Justice released a controversial memo. It authorizes states to send Americans with disabilities to institutions, nursing homes, psych wards, segregated schools, rather than funding the community-based services that allow them to remain at home.
Segregated schools. What is up with this country? We have come so far. If you listen to the lyrics of that song that I wrote, that I played here in the opening, I've seen the top of that mountain. Why is it that we think we have to go back and go backwards?
This would undo decades of community integration reforms, including longtime Supreme Court precedent that was designed to allow those with disabilities to live independent, productive lives. This week, we learned that White House Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller was behind that memo, according to Bloomberg Law, who spoke to people who were briefed. And while spokespeople for both the White House and the DOJ denied that Miller played a role in the memo, this attempt to remove folks with disabilities from their communities tracks with his exclusionary vision for this country. Miller is infamously obsessed with demographics, crowing just today about deporting Haitian migrants and refugees. Under his watch,
crowing just today, gloating on how he is taking our country backwards, how he is not happy with our melting pot existence.
DHS has produced a trove of state propaganda, which experts say promotes white nationalist slogans and iconography. He is also, of course, the architect of Trump's draconian immigration policies. And as the New York Times reports, during a private meeting during the last presidential campaign, Trump reportedly told staff that Miller wants to deport more than 2/3 of this country's population, leaving behind only those who look like him.
Well, if that's not enough, guys, let me know what is. I would like to know what on earth could be worse than this. What is it that made us think this is someone we needed to put into office? All right, y'all. So again, my brother and I, we swore an oath to that Constitution. And that Constitution was supposed to protect those that are vulnerable. And this Americans with Disabilities Act, yeah, this is what's upholding our rights under the Constitution. So the people that gave the most, now we're too burdensome to protect. Any of those vets with disabilities, too burdensome to protect. So let's bring it back home to our second portion, our kids. Now the second hat. I'm a public school teacher. So let me tell you what's happening to disabled children. And let me tell it accurately, because the accurate version is bad enough. I don't need that much hyperbole tonight. For 50 years, there's been a law called IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that guarantees every child with a disability the right to a real public education, an IEP, as I mentioned earlier. Services, a shot. Before that law, millions of disabled kids were simply shut out of school entirely. IDEA is the promise that ended that. Now, I'll be straight with you, because honesty is the whole brand here. This year, a bipartisan Congress actually held the core special education funding roughly steady. Credit where it's due. So this isn't today about the headline dollar figure. Here's what it is about. The administration moved to dismantle the Department of Education. And while only Congress can truly close it, they gutted the offices inside that enforces IDEA. No one's working there anymore except the head of it. The Office of Special Education Programs hollowed it out. The Office for Civil Rights, which investigates when a school discriminates against a disabled kid, lost more than half of its attorneys at a time when families filed a record number of complaints, nearly 40% of them about disability. They canceled grants that train special education teachers, and states are suing to get that money back. And they've floated block granting IDEA and shipping the whole thing off to Health and Human Services. So picture it like this. The law is still on the books, but the referees just walked off of the field, and advocates are already reporting that some local officials are asking out loud which parts of IDEA they can ignore now, because they figured out nobody in Washington is watching anymore. As a teacher, I'm telling you, that's how a right dies. Not with a repeal, with nobody left to enforce it. And in my classroom, every single day, I see kids that need these IEPs, that need their 504 plans. And what is anybody doing about it now? If, as we are deteriorating all these services, you need to talk to your school boards, to your county officials, and you need to demand from county level, the city level, if you belong to a city school system, you need to demand from there all the way to Frankfurt and all the way to DC that this is not let go, that we do not quit enforcing the laws that are on the book to protect children with disabilities. Because I, as it is already, I have a heavy burden to bear as a public school teacher. And I cannot stand to see any kids fall through the cracks in this country that gave me everything I asked of it after I joined the military. So call your representatives from the county level, city level, state level, federal level. Do not let them off the hook on this. All right, Tom, before I go on, let's see what Tom's saying. Tom says, in 1979, my high school best friend suffered a cervical spine break due to a skiing mishap. He was a quadriplegic the rest of his life. The ADA didn't happen for another 15 years. And Tom says, I learned how to adapt early on and could walk into a restaurant, look around for a few seconds, and walk out and tell him how many tables he could get to and whether it was worth the trouble. Tom concludes here by saying, so yes, I have some interest in protecting the rights of folks whose abilities are different than my own. And again, you know, if it wasn't for that Americans with Disabilities Act, when my brother, before he could walk and was in a wheelchair, before he got back up on that prosthetic leg, and we had to wheel him wherever he wanted to go, it was disheartening to see people treat him so cruelly with that wheelchair, not give him room on an elevator, rush, to not even let him on. Yeah. So it should not be what you're talking about, Tom. I'm glad to see that we've got these rules so that, someone with disabilities has a parking spot. Someone with disabilities can go from their vehicle to the door of a restaurant and go into that restaurant and know they can have a seat. They can have a table with all of us. They can break bread with all of us. Coffee Cats, good to see you on here tonight. Yeah, you're right. Tom is a good sort. All right. Tom says he tries to be. All right. So, well, we've given some really good examples here. So how do we hold the line? This is where we got to get down to the nuts and bolts. All right, so I'll try and give them their argument, as I always do. They say they're cutting red tape, returning powers to the states, making government leaner. Here's my answer, and I won't soften it. Civil rights are not red tape. And leave it to the states is the exact thing that for generations kept disabled kids out of school and disabled adults out of work, because plenty of states wouldn't do right by them until a federal law made them. That's why the Americans with Disabilities Act and IDEA exist. So when somebody tells me the fix is to gut the federal protection and trust each state to handle it, I hear the echo of every excuse that came before the progress. It's going back to what Tom's talking about in '79. I've read my history. The disability community fought for decades in the streets, crawling up the Capitol steps of the federal Capitol to win these rights. I am not going to stand by quietly while they are hollowed out in the dark. So here's where I land with both hats on. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the thread of this whole show. And there's no version of those words that leaves out the disabled. not the veteran who gave a leg and a hand and wanted to work and live in his community. That was my brother. Not the child in my classroom who just needs the services the law already promised her. Not the wife caring for her wounded husband who needs the support to keep him home. Not the parent caring for the child with severe autism that just needs that stipend so that they can keep their family intact and whole as that child grows. And then as that child enters adulthood, they don't want to see their child forced off into an institution. I don't want to break down and cry on this show, but that would absolutely, that would be too much for me to watch. An adult child of two people I love in this county, if their adult children had to be carted off to an institution, it would not be a good thing, because their life, their liberty, their pursuit of happiness counts every bit as much as yours and mine. And I'm not going to equivocate on that. Now, I'm running for magistrate. I won't get a vote on a federal memo or a federal law, but I'll tell you what this seat can do and what I'll do with it. Make sure our own county facilities are accessible and ADA compliant, that our local services don't quietly let the disabled fall through the cracks, and that there is at least one loud voice in this county who will never, ever treat our disabled neighbors or our disabled veterans, our disabled kids as burdensome. We do not turn back the clock on these folks. Not in Washington and not in Hardin County, Kentucky. Not while I've got a microphone, not while I've got a brother who paid the price and he still is here deep in my heart. So I will not let that happen. I'm Spencer Keck, the educated hillbilly. And y'all, we got to keep on thinking deeply. We got to stay in this together. We've got to realize that motto on Kentucky's flag that says, united we stand, divided we fall. Y'all, that is not just words on a flag. That is the glue that holds this whole show together. Because if we love our neighbors as ourselves, and we recognize that we are our brother's keeper and we are our sister's keeper, we cannot be divided, and then we cannot fall. And we will not fall. Y'all remember, everyone deployed overseas. And before I close off, Coffee Cats, good to see you here again. Yep. And yes, Coffee Cats, they do want to send us back to the 1800s. I think even back before that, back pre-1776. Coffee Cat says 1890s, rather. Silent Fireplacer. All right. Coffee Cats, one team. That's it. One team, one fight. Y'all, bless your corazon. That is Spanish for heart. That's on, I got that from that great place to get breakfast in Louisville called Foco. If you ever want to have a great meal, I hardly ever will advertise for anything outside of Hardin County, but FOKO is the place to go for good, really good combo of Kentucky style breakfast with Mexican style breakfast. Scrumptious, great coffee, everything. All right. Again, bless each of us, every one. I hope that you're having the kind of weekend that will not let this rain get you down. I'm hoping that you are out there shining when the sun doesn't shine. That's what I like to say. That's what I try to do. And if anyone needs to get a hold of me, 270-872-3732. Give me a call. Give me a holler. Let me know how we can work on some of these things together that I'm talking about. And if you're you want to come talk to me, have coffee with me, and we need to get together and do that. Let's do it. Again, call that number 270-872-3732. I would love to see you. And let's take it out with this one.
A recently released Justice Department memo questions decades of protections for Americans with disabilities. It's the latest effort by the Trump administration to shift long-standing practices for the disability community. Ali Rogan has more on potentially landmark changes.
Nick, the new memo is one of several attempts to change services and policies dedicated to people with disabilities. The DOJ says states aren't required to provide home and community-based services that have long kept disabled Americans out of institutions if they would benefit from these other services. And as the administration seeks to shutter the Department of Education, it's moving key responsibilities to agencies which disability advocates say are less equipped to handle them. For perspective on what these actions mean for the disability community, I'm joined by Maria Town. She's president and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities. Maria, you are on the move today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I first want to ask about this DOJ memo, which really provides a new interpretation of these existing laws and a Supreme Court decision that reaffirmed what we have understood to this point to be the rights afforded to people with disabilities. Can you just walk us through what those existing statutes are?
So in the Americans with Disabilities Act, which turns 36 next month, there is an integration mandate. And the Olmstead decision is a Supreme Court decision that turns 27 years old today that affirmed the integration mandate in the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Olmstead decision stated that people with disabilities had to be served in the most integrated setting whenever possible. What this means in practice is that states cannot forcibly institutionalize people with disabilities, whether that be in nursing homes, state psychiatric facilities, or in other institutional settings. And so this memo from the Department of Justice, which says that Olmstead is not enforceable, completely goes against all previous legal precedent, and it also goes against the will of Congress and the will of the Supreme Court.
So if states no longer feel obligated because of this DOJ legal opinion, which we should mention is not a law, but could have far-reaching implications anyway, if states don't feel obligated to provide these services to people who would benefit from them rather than go into an institution, what does that mean for the people who rely on home and community-based services?
This means that people's ability to live in their homes and in their communities and with their families and friends that they love is in jeopardy. If states decide not to follow decades of legal precedent and existing civil rights, it means that people with disabilities may be forced into institutions instead of being provided with services that allow them to thrive in their communities. It may also mean that people's health suffers, and in the worst case scenario, it means people will die. We know that people with disabilities and older adults have better outcomes and live longer lives when they are served in the community and not in institutions. So this could have extremely dire consequences for many people and their families across the country.
Separately, Maria, the administration is taking steps to move oversight of special education from the Department of Education to HHS. Here is what Education Secretary Linda McMahon said recently about these changes. Quote, "By closely partnering with HHS, we will align federal services to improve academic outcomes, strengthen access to programs and information, and support people with disabilities so they can gain self-sufficiency, life tools, and meaningful employment that they need to succeed in their lives." How does your group see it?
This move basically re-medicalizes the education of students with disabilities. Putting special education in education asserts that students with disabilities have a chance at mainstream curriculum, at developing critical thinking skills, and in participating in the mainstream classrooms with their non-disabled peers. We see this as a resegregation of students with disabilities when literally for the past 50 years, the standard has been to serve students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment and to ensure that students with disabilities have a free and appropriate public education. We are concerned that the public education students with disabilities will receive will no longer be appropriate because it will no longer be a meaningful education.
And we see the government focusing on changes to policies and services that affect children and adults with disabilities. What are the stakes for the wider disability community here?
These changes, both the change in education coupled with the DOJ memo, basically put our nation back at least 50 years, if not more. We are worried that we will see the progress that's been made on disability rights and on the quality of life of disabled people, whether they're young or old, erode very, very quickly, and that hard-fought progress will be lost.
Maria Town, President and CEO of the American Association of People with Disabilities, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Support journalism.
Stand